All right, I'm here at Neon Fest with Robert Parker. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you.
What time is it in Sweden? Just out of curiosity right now?
6 hours later than here.
Oh, Jesus. Okay, so I'm sure you're still feeling that.
Yeah, a little bit. I woke up like a normal American morning time, so I try to trick myself
Right.
that I'm in the same time zone as I usually is.
So, starting from the beginning, your first experience with music was playing piano at the age of 6. So I have to ask, did you actually want to, or did your parents make you?
Both, I think. I mean, I was interested playing the piano,
Mm-hmm.
so my parents suggested that I would take lessons, and it worked out fine. But I was a little bit. I never really liked to learn to read notes, so I started to learn all my piano lessons by ear. And from the get-go, the teacher didn't really understand that I was just memorizing the how it sounded. But after a while, it came to a point where I had a really good teacher, and she understood that this was the way I wanted to learn how to play music. So she changed like the style of her teaching, so I could learn to play by ear instead. So I can read notes, I can say this is an E minor chord and so on, but I could never like have a sheet of music in front of me and just play it. But I can, if I hear it, I can play it. So.
I'm not an expert on your home country or anything, but you said in an interview a lot of quintessential 80s media that inspires a lot of your music. You didn't get exposed to that until later in the decade, like 87, 88, 89, because there were a lot of restrictions by the government on media. Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Sweden has always been a democracy, but a lot of the things in Sweden were state governed until the beginning of the 90s. Both the selling of alcohol, the selling of electricity, the phone company, the television, all were run by the government. You didn't have any private companies competitioning about it. So it was like state owned, everything. So until 1986-87, you had 2 TV channels. And well, you didn't really. People had starting to buy, these dish antennas. I don't know the word in English, like
Satellite dishes?
yeah, satellite dishes and so on. Those were allowed, but they were really expensive. So it was mostly like people migrating to Sweden who put them up in order to catch their broadcasting from their own countries. But after a while, in the end of the 80s, we started to get more commercial TV channels, and then all the classic TV shows came on those channels. So a little bit later than maybe in the rest of the world, and now we have like commercial radio channels, commercial TV channels, and everything. So now you have anything.
What was the thing that kind of spurred them to change the way that they run the stations and what's allowed on there?
Well, it was basically was political decisions. We had a more from the beginning. We had quite a socialist government. Both good and bad with that. I mean, you get free healthcare and everything, but from the get-go, they were also quite strict with media outlets. So both radio and TV was state-governed. It was not propaganda or anything, not like that. The cultural discussion was a little bit during the 70s and the 80s that America was a little bit, it was like watching Dallas, that was broadcast on national television, the state-owned. Watching Dallas was like a guilty pleasure for people. Like, oh, they are so, they're so bad people. It's a little bit like a guilty pleasure. But then the government, after a few elections, we had new parties, new government that were more, I don't know what you would say, more liberal or more like, yeah. So they changed legislations basically, and you were allowed to open up private TV channels.
You began dabbling in electronic music in '97 with tracker music. Could you elaborate a bit on what that genre entails?
Yeah. I mean, tracker music were quite popular in Sweden back then, and around '97, I got my first computer that could really handle those kind of programs. So there were a lot of small communities doing tracker music, sharing this online, and in a way quite similar as the Synthwave community in the way that there's not a big difference between being a fanboy and a producer. A lot of people did music and listened to other people's music, and people started to organizing like parties playing this kind of music. I wasn't really that social in the community. I listened to a lot of music and like commented and feedback and so on, but I never went to any like mod parties or tracker parties or anything like that. But a lot of people doing music now did that in the 90s, so we were sort of rediscovering each other, like, oh, you were that alias and you were that guy, and yeah, so that's quite fun.
I read that you're also a doctor on the side.
Oh yeah, I work in emergency medicine. Yeah, I do.
When did you initially become interested in doing something in that field?
After graduating from high school, I tried a lot of different things. First I started to study to become an engineer, but I realized that wasn't really for me. And then I studied history, philosophy, and those kind of things. I worked for a teacher for a year, and tried a lot of different things. I studied Greek, Italian, German, but then I realized that I wanted to have like some sort of. I never wanted to put all my eggs in one basket. You know, I wanted to. Working as a doctor in Sweden, you don't have to work full time or work like your ass off if you don't want to. You can work part time. It's quite easy because it's such a big demand for doctors in Sweden, so you can set your terms quite easy. So I have always worked part-time in order to have time for other things like music. So it's a good way to have like a safe, steady income, and then you can use the rest of the time for your creative interests.
On to your current act. It started taking form in 2009, 2010 when you began buying old synthesizers left and right. What spurred you to start doing that?
I started to earn money, so I could afford to try it out. Basically, old analog synthesizers, they have a specific sound. If you don't really experiment too much, like a Roland Juno synthesizer, they sound really like 80s. So you're sort of you sort of get into that sound palette when you start to play around with them. So it felt quite natural to, you know, sort of rediscover that sound, the 80s inspired sound with the synthesizers.
While you were getting started with the 80s sound, you also were composing songs in other styles and posting them to the SoundCloud, like jazz and classical. And you said that you decided to eventually go with the 80s sound because that seemed to be what stuck the most with people. Is that to say that you were maybe hoping to try your hand more so in another genre as well?
From the beginning, when I back in 2008, 2009, when I got a good computer with a decent musical program, the opportunities are limitless. You know, you can do whatever you like nowadays, and that's fun for a while. But after a while, you can appreciate things that limit you as well, because within those limits there are much more incitments for being creative, even though that might sound contradictory. It's sometimes you can do more when you have less options. You can faster get an idea what you want to do with the possibilities you have, basically, and then you play around with those and you realize that the possibilities are limitless anyway, but you sort of have then you have at least created like a narrative that you work within. So then you get, as an artist, you get more of a connection to what you're doing, maybe, and more of a more of a feeling of it all belongs together in one way. And I also always had an idea that I would really like to perform live with my music, and perform live in a way that was like a little bit club oriented. And when I realized I wanted to do that, and it was quite easy to keep on doing electronic music, because even though I like classical music, I still do it for TV productions and stuff on the side, but not in this project, you know. Then I wanted to like have more of a frame that people can relate to.
That being said, on one of your earlier tracks called L'Intellectual Classique, I'm sure I remember that.
Oh yeah.
There's a picture of
JeanPaul Sartre. Yeah.
Are you a fan of his works?
Yeah. I think I like his philosophic work. I'm really a a fan of the French culture in general, both the philosophy, the literature, the history, and also the electronic music. I think that country has a lot of things to offer. So yeah,
I got big into Camus last year, so I can.
Cool. Yeah. JeanPaul Sartre and Albert Camus, those are basically my favorite French writers. So yeah.
Is it true that you didn't know your current style fell into the synthwave sound until your friend Joachim Reimer told you about it?
Yeah, you have done thorough research, my friend. Yeah, that's right. Because I started to put up tracks, and I saw that there were nice response to the tracks. And after a year or two, he contacted me like, yeah, I'm a photographer. I'm doing like a long-term project when I want to do photos of all the Swedish synthwave artists. I was like, synthwave, what's that? Like, yeah, the music you're doing. It is? Okay. Yeah. So yeah, with that being said, I started to explore the genre and the community more, and that's when I sort of came into the community a little bit more as well. Yeah.
And he's in an act of his own, Shy Guys, right? Didn't they just come out with a new album?
Exactly. That's right. That album has been a long time coming, because they started out with those tracks when we got to know each other. So they have been working a long time on that. But yeah, I think it's a great album. It's really, really well produced.
You've said that you're a big fan of artist Florins Work, and even had him do the artwork and graphics for the albums Crystal City, Awakening, and End of the Night.
Yeah.
Do you remember how you initially came across his work?
Yeah, I saw some of his older animations a few years ago. He had done an animation of like a robot factory or something. They're still on the internet on his webpage. It's from 2011 or 12 or something. I thought that was really cool. So I was in contact with him, and then we sort of it was a hiatus for a year or two. And he did an animation for Miami Nights with a DeLorean driving around. And after that we talked again, and he wanted to do. Then he said, "Hey, I have more free time right now. I can do something." And he came up with the idea to do a Red Lotus car. That's designed by the same car designer who designed the DeLorean, and they are a little bit similar actually in design. I don't know anything about cars, but
neither do I.
But he does. So he was like, yeah, it's a good like connection. Okay, sure. So then he did both an animation and the cover design.
For your album Money Talks, he said that you took a lot of inspiration from, quote, cheesy American catalog music from the 80s. Of all the things to gain inspiration from, why stuff that you would hear in like commercials at 3 o'clock in the morning?
Why I did it? You mean?
What about that music like spoke to you?
Yeah, it was different. I mean, even though it's like production music that people did for different purposes, like having in the background of commercials and stuff, it's still, when I heard it, I felt like this sounds fresh, because it stood out from whatever you hear on the radio otherwise. And I felt like I really need to like build on this and try to do something on my own. Nowadays with YouTube and the internet, you can surf around, and people have uploaded all kinds of crazy catalog music. So I mean, opportunities for inspiration are like limitless basically. So there were a lot of I'm really bad with remembering names, but John Devereaux, for example, he's done a lot of those kind of tracks that sounds, like you have like a digital synth workstation where you both have the drums and the bass and the chords in the same kind of workstation synthesizer, like the Korg M1 and the Korg Wave Station. So I also used those synthesizers to be true to the origin.
In regards to Crystal City, the name of the album is a tribute to another album, Crystal City, but spelled with an H, by Alan Brax and Fred Falk. When did you first come across this album?
It's actually an EP, I think, and one of the tracks is named Crystal City.
Okay.
Yeah, it was in the early 2000s, because Alan Brax and Fred Falke, they teamed up in 2001, 2002, I think. And they had a huge hit in France that year that was called Intro. Alan Braxe, he had previously worked with Thomas Bangalter from Daft Punk and what's his name? They had a project together called. They did this track. Music sounds better with you. Stardust was the name of the group. So it was Alan Brax, Fred Falke, and his name was something Diamond. I don't know. Music sounds better with you, baby. It was 1997, just before Daft Punk became really big. But then Thomas Bangalter, he sort of left and focused only on Daft Punk, and Alan Braxton teamed up with Fred Falke. And they did what I would say is like proto synthwave in one way, because what they did was that they did a lot of like French electro-inspired stuff, and they had if you listen to a lot of Daft Punk songs, you have like a sort of an electronic bass going, something like that. But what they did in their projects, they actually changed the bass line to more electronic bass, and they had more like 4 on the floor and 16-note bass lines, like dun, 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 those kind of things. Sort of Italo disco inspired, but also still very true to the French touch genre. And when I heard that mix, I was like, man, this is not explored enough. I need to do more of this style.
Another artist who's performing here tonight, Wave Shaper.
Yep.
You said that he was the one that got you to work alongside for the Video Man soundtrack.
Exactly.
How did that come about?
Yeah, I have him to thank for being part of the soundtrack, because Wave Shaper was initially contacted by the director and asked if he wanted to do some of the music. We are in total, I think, 10 artists actually contributing, even though Tom and I, Wave Shaper, we have done the instrumental, that takes up most of the time in the movie, but there are also a few artists that have made like pop songs that are in there. Tom was very comfortable doing like the darker stuff, but the director, he also wanted more like love songs and love story themed kind of things. And at the same time, he was very busy with his family life, so he asked me if I wanted to join him, basically. So, the director, he found my music on SoundCloud and he liked it a lot, so he also asked me if I wanted to be a part of it. So I have them to thank for it. It was a really nice combination, because the sound palette was, they're sort of intertwined in one way, so it works well together, I think. And I saw the movie this Tuesday for the first time. I have seen the separate scenes that I have composed to, but I wanted to wait until the real premiere to see the movie in its entirety. So this Tuesday was the first time I actually saw the entire movie. But I'm really happy with the result. It's quite different.
Are they going to be trying to release it in America too, or?
I think so. It's a Swedish movie. It's not like very over the top. It's like a dark comedy kind of thing. I don't know if it would work in the United States or not. I'm not sure. It got good reviews in Britain. They had it there at the Fright Festival yesterday, I think. But yeah, we will see what happens. The soundtrack was released on Lakeshore Records, so that's an American label. Also, anything is possible. But I know it's going around in different countries in Europe right now, at least.
There was a quote I read in another interview where you said that you never develop as a musician or producer if you just keep on repeating your own expressions, and that's why you love collaborating with other artists. Is there one artist in particular that you've learned the most from working alongside them?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that Wave Shaper and Shy Guys, Joachim from Shy Guys, I've learned most from them, both creative-wise and more technically producer-wise. But yeah, but I guess it's also because we're friends, so basically since we got to know each other 5 years ago, we've had like an ongoing chat discussion. We speak almost every day about stuff, so of course then you learn a lot from each other.
One thing that I think kind of makes you stand out is that you're one of the more well-known synth acts, but at the same time, at least from what I've researched, you're more or less yourself on stage, and you don't have like this elaborate backstory to you. But you're an outlier in that sense, because it seems like every big synthwave artist has, this huge expansive backstory with this multi-layered sort of universe. Do you think that for up-and-coming synthwave artists, there's this added pressure to not only make music that connects with fans, but to also make an intriguing enough backstory, and in turn make them worry about, not letting their true selves out in fear of what the fans might think of them.
That's a really good point, because it's actually a very deliberate decision not to have a name like Laser or something. That was a really deliberate decision from the beginning, because in one way I felt like I stood out because of that. Yeah, I mean, right now there are so many people producing, and I love to listen to things, but I know right now I don't have the time to digest everything. There are so many people doing it. But yeah, my firm belief is that if you still are doing great music and it sounds good, then you don't have to have a special name or anything. Not really. I think you need to be little bit consistent with your sound, maybe, but otherwise, I think do what's fun. If you want to put up an act and play in a mask or something, dress up like something, do that. But if you don't feel comfortable with it, don't do it. I mean, for me it was really important to be comfortable on stage, and I felt like if I would cloak myself or anything, or hide behind some elaborate artist name, I could never speak to people or be natural otherwise, so I felt like I have to yeah, that's why I always just wear a t-shirt and jeans on stage. I want just to focus on the music, but I like some of the acts that put up an act, like Starcadian, for example, who I played with 3 months ago. His music is awesome, and it fits so well with his sort of alien outfit, because he plays it out so well, So yeah, that works too.
I think that is actually all that I have for you. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, not really. I'm really impressed by your research. I mean, you seem to have really dug into a lot of details. That's really cool.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you.